Evening and welcome members and public to this evening's council meeting. Members, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak. You'll be operating your own microphones. We are live streaming this meeting this evening and we'll be using the electronic voting system using the consoles in front of you. When a vote is called for, they will light up and you'll be able to vote. Remember, left is for, abstain is in the middle, and against is on the right. If any member calls for a recorded vote and is duly supported by 4 others, we will do this via a roll call in the normal way. If members are happy to agree a recommendation by general assent, we will do that in the usual way. Speeches will be timed at 4 minutes, and you will be given a 30-second warning before your time is up. Members may speak only once on each item, except in the circumstances as set out in Procedure Rule 15.6. If you're making a point of order, please be clear about which procedure, rule or law you think has been breached and how, and wait for agreement before you proceed. The agenda was published on the 17th of January 2025 and a supplement on the 21st of January containing the full set of reports. A further supplement has been made available to members this evening containing a correction to paragraph 14.20, which is on page 33 of the Senior Staff Investigation Report. So agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Katie, are there any?
I can't see. We have Councillor Ward, Councillor Williams and Councillor Wicks have given their apologies.
Thank you. And declaration. Keane and Davidson.
Thank you.
Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any? No. Agenda item 3 is questions from members of the public. There are none. And number 4 is questions from members of the council. There are none. So we move to agenda item number 5, senior staff investigation. Before the council can proceed to the substantive item, the council needs to consider whether this matter should be dealt with in private or in public. May I ask the monitoring officer to give us some advice on the public interest test, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Before I start, may I introduce to you 2 colleagues who have been supporting the council with this matter. So firstly, Mr. Mark Greenborough, who has been providing legal advice to the council, and secondly, Mr. Simon Stevens from Hemingsley Law, who has been the investigator in this matter, and my thanks to them for attending the council meeting this evening to give the opportunity for you to ask them questions. Agenda item 5 before you relates to the investigation commissioned by the Council's Joint Senior Staff Committee in February 2024, undertaken by Hemingsley Law. There are 4 recommendations to Council this evening, and we will need to consider the first recommendation separately before the others. The first recommendation relates to the procedural issue only of whether or not the Council chooses to move into private session by excluding the press and public. And I'd like to take the opportunity of providing you with some advice in respect to that matter. Firstly, I will apologise for the late circulation of the report on this item. The report was published to all councillors on Monday of this week, but I would point out that the agenda for the meeting was published 5 clear working days prior to the meeting with this item listed on it, so I'm confident that the council is acting lawfully in taking this late report. I hope members will appreciate that a great deal of work has been going on in respect of sharing the draft report with the individuals named, receiving their comments and making amendments to it, and also taking legal advice from both Mr. Greenborough and also from King's Counsel on information law and defamation issues, and that led to the late circulation. So The decisions that are being recommended this evening are in summary to note and comment on the report and any appropriate action that should be taken. It's also being proposed that there will be further consideration of the report by the Executive, the ONS Committee and the Standards and General Purposes Committee, so that they may consider whether the report raises any issues within their remit and responsibility. So firstly, I'd like to draw members' attention to the fact that the starting point for this issue is that it should be held in public. So Section 100B of the Local Government Act 1972 provides that generally councils do their business in public and that members of the public have access to reports in advance of meetings. On this occasion, members haven't had access to the reports for this meeting in advance, and that's because on the face of it, the report contains what we call exempt information, and that includes information relating to an individual and information likely to reveal the identity of an individual. And the Local Government Act provides that if the proper officer thinks fit, a report can be excluded from public access in advance of the meeting, where in his or her opinion, the meeting is likely not to be open to the public. And in that regard, I view likely in that context to mean simply that it's plausible that the item would be discussed in private. So that's just to explain to you why the papers so far have been printed and circulated to you on pink papers as exempt information. Paragraph 10 of the legislation provides that exempt information remains exempt if and so long as, in all the circumstances, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So before deciding whether or not to exclude the press and public from tonight's meeting, Council will need to undertake a balancing exercise of the public interest in this matter and determine whether or not it outweighs the interest in maintaining the exemption. If Council decides that the public interest in the report outweighs the interest in maintaining the exemption, the Council should not exclude the press and public, but rather continue in open session to consider the substantive item. If so, Council will be asked to take a short adjournment for a few minutes to enable copies of the report to be made available to the public and to be published on the Council's website. So, turning to the public interest test, may I suggest some of the factors to members that you should address your minds to and include in your deliberations. Firstly, I think it's very important that you consider the likely impact of disclosure on those individuals who are named or identifiable in the report and any detriment that they may suffer from its disclosure, including any impact on their well-being, on their employment potentially, and on their family lives. Secondly, I would suggest you will need to consider the human resources and wider implications, including morale, on the rest of the organisation, should you decide to disclose the report into the public tonight. And thirdly, I would say that there is generally in local government a reasonable expectation on officers that they are not publicly named in such matters. However, I think you will need to consider the fact that the information about the individuals in the report is not considered to be sensitive personal data. So whilst it names individuals, it doesn't, for example, include home addresses. And how the information has been compiled is also relevant. So the information in the report is a commentary following a fair and thorough investigation undertaken by an independent investigator into how those officers discharge their duties. The seniority of the officers is a factor that you will want to consider, and you will note that in the report only officers of the level of Deputy Chief Officer and higher in terms of seniority have been named, and that the closest scrutiny falls upon the former Chief Executive and members of the Corporate Management Board. You will want to consider the sums of money involved in this matter, which are substantial and relate to public money. And also that the issues contained in the report arose over a lengthy and sustained period of time. The council is a local authority, a public body, accountable to the public with established rules and procedures in place to ensure robust governance, and the report finds significant non-compliance. There has already been a considerable interest shown by the public and the press in this matter, leading to articles published in local print and media and websites. And seeking to exempt papers does not uphold the local government principle of transparency encapsulated in various pieces of legislation that makes it clear that the starting point for the council is to undertake its business in public. Exempting papers can lead to speculation as to what has been withheld and baseless accusations, whereas disclosing papers shows the council's commitment to the investigative process. I would also point out that given the review of the evidence and the report by a senior barrister specialising in defamation law, members should feel able to have a high degree of confidence in the quality of the opinions and the facts that have been reported, and also that the report has been shared with the police in terms of the ongoing criminal investigation into allegations of fraud against Guildford Borough Council, and the police investigation team have raised no concerns regarding the possible publication of the report. Finally, I think the most important factor for you to consider in your deliberations on the public test is that as of yesterday evening, the papers are already in the public domain, have been considered by a neighbouring authority in public session, and indeed have been reported upon today in the media and the press. So my advice to council is that it would both be lawful for the council to exclude the press and public this evening, and also lawful for them not to do so. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and I will come back to you.
Thank you, Susan. So I am now going to propose the motion to exclude the press and the public as follows. That the public and the press be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following matter on the grounds that it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during the item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by section 1001 of the Act, of the description specified in paragraphs 1, 2, 5 and 7 of the revised Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Councillor Goodridge.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I think bearing in mind this has already been published as a result
Point of order, the point of order. We haven't, it hasn't been seconded or anything yet. We haven't done any of the procedure.
Councillor Goodridge can make a point of order at any time.
He didn't state that,
No.
though, Madam Mayor.
So Councillor Goodridge, did you have a point of order?
I'm happy to speak after a bit. On a point of order, it seems absolutely daft to put this application in when it's already in the public domain. I mean, the public have read it already.
Okay, thank you very much. That's not a point of order. Councillor Follows, would you like to second?
I would like to second, and I'll speak on a seconder if that's acceptable now.
Thank you.
For the clarification of members, in order to formally release information that is currently exempt in the public domain, there has to be a formal motion to exclude, which is voted upon and then loses. So I'm going to be in the strange position of formally seconding a motion that I'm going to be voting against myself and asking you to do the same. That is in order to formally release this information into the public domain. And to further clarify, as much as the papers are in almost every respect identical to the papers released last night at Guildford, they are legally separate. They are papers of Waverley Borough Council and therefore must be released as well. Now, the thing that obviously has changed, as Councillor Goodridge has mentioned, is that over the course of the last 24 hours, Guildford Borough Council themselves voted to release this information. The parallel debate at Guildford Borough Council, which I attended as an observer last night, was, I think, a great credit to them. They dealt with many of the issues very sensitively, very carefully, and I think very properly. In terms of my own opinion on this matter and why I'll be voting against the motion of which I have just seconded, is that I do believe that we are, as a borough and a body, accountable to the public in a way that means that we need to ensure that information such as this is debated properly and in the public domain. The sums of money involved are significant, and I do believe that there is a position of leadership that these individuals held that means that they are accountable in a higher sense than other officers of any authority. And that honestly, the red flags that in part of this process that I'm sure we will be discussing in more depth that were missed are serious in Guildford and do merit that serious public consideration of the matter. So members, I hope I have explained the process by which we're having to go through here. It is quite convoluted, but in order to release the papers, we must have a motion that brings us to the fore. But I do urge you to do as I'm going to do, which is to vote against that motion, which will achieve these being released into the public domain. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any speakers? Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Mayor. I would have supported the move to exempt quite strongly because, but I'm not obviously going to press that any further as the whole information is out in public. But I think once something is released into the public domain, it cannot be withdrawn. And there's some such sensitive matters there that I'm very uneasy, and I regret Guildford Borough Council's decision, but I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to pursue that. I'm actually more concerned with paragraph 6.1 of the report before us, which says the costs of the investigation are £109,000 and are shared equally between the two councils and financed through reserves.
One moment, Councillor Munro, so we'll take that later. Okay, take your next point later.
The information on those papers is...
I'm talking about the report,
Yes.
which is not exempt. It's on white paper.
No,
I
it's
think
not.
it is all in exempt, whether on white or pink. That's exempt. So moving on to Councillor Austin.
Yeah.
Just to ask us to move to vote.
So,
It's not.
yes, thank you.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the motion that's been proposed and seconded is to exclude the press and public. So if you want to remain in open session, you would need to vote against that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm now going to call for those in favour of the motion to exclude the press and public to please raise your hands.
0.
So I think that is unanimously overturned. Yes, just check. Anybody want to abstain? Please raise your hand. Thank you, Councillor Munro. And anybody who wants to vote against?
Sorry, forgive me.
The motion is defeated by 35 votes with 1 abstention. So we will now proceed in this matter in public. And so I now propose that we adjourn this meeting for a short period to enable officers to circulate copies of the report to members of the public and press who are present and to upload the report to the public website. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. So we will adjourn for about 5 minutes. We're back. Welcome. So the webcast is resumed. We're going to continue the meeting. First, I can confirm that having taken appropriate officer advice in accordance with Council Procedure Rule 15.1, that I have agreed to waive the rules of debate referred to in Council Procedure Rule 15.2 for this item, so allowing you to engage with a question and answer session with Mr. Simon Stephen of Hemsley Law in respect of the investigation in advance of the formal consideration and debate of this matter, and also to give the political group leaders the opportunity of commenting first during the debate on the motion in respect of this matter. So Pedro, may I ask you to give your officer report on this, please?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I assume all members have had a chance to read my report and the independent investigators report. The report summarises the findings and conclusions of an investigation carried out by Hemsley Law, a law firm that specialises in investigations of this nature in both the public and private sectors. The report is principally the work of Simon Stephen, who Susan has introduced and is sitting over there, and to whom we'll turn in a moment. I wanted to start by expressing my gratitude to Simon and to Trevor Gibson from Hemsley Law for the work that they've done. And given that much of the matters covered in the report refer to Guildford Borough Council, I think it'd be helpful to set out for members some of the context. In 2023, historic issues around Guildford Borough Council's governance and financial controls came to light. The council alerted the police, who launched an investigation. The council continues to cooperate with the investigation and has provided both the report you see here today and the supporting evidence that sits behind it to them. 2 reviews were undertaken by the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives, SOLACE, that looked at Guildford Council's governance, financial controls and culture. Those reports highlighted that the council had been at risk of not meeting its best value duty and made recommendations on how to improve. Guildford's improvement plan, a copy of which you received, appended to my report, incorporates all those recommendations and goes further. I will add that Guildford Council set up an independent assurance panel made up of independent experts, which provides advice and challenge to the council in its improvement journey. The panel provided its first 6-month report last month, and Guildford Council heard from the chair of the panel, Andrew Flockhart, and heard his view that the council were ahead of where he expected them to be. This report that you have before you today is the final piece of that puzzle. Unlike the SOLACE reports, which focused on the governance, financial and cultural architecture of the organisation, this report aimed to establish who knew what, when, and what actions were taken or should have been taken by the senior leadership of the time to secure compliance and deliver best value for residents and businesses. I would point members to paragraph 3.7 of Simon's report, which sets out the investigator, Simon's, view on member involvement and his view that this is primarily an officer issue. All the senior officers named in this report have left the employment of Waverley and Guildford councils and are therefore not bound by our employment or disciplinary terms. No disciplinary action was taken against any of them during their employment with Guildford and Waverley councils. Simon's going to go into more detail about his methodology, but I will say that our objective is to deliver great services to our residents and businesses across Waverley and Guildford. We want to be resilient and well-managed councils, providing the services and value that our residents and businesses can be proud of. Having been through the report, it's clear that there were significant shortcomings within Guildford Borough Council, and our residents rightly expect us to do better. That said, I cannot see anything about the fundamental governance and finance architecture that's raised in this report that hadn't previously been picked up by the Solace reports. I'm therefore confident that the Council's improvement plan, Guildford Council's improvement plan, has picked up everything that's raised in that report. But it is a 3-year plan and it has further to run. I should also note the improvement plan isn't just relevant to Guildford. The lessons from Guildford are being applied to help improve Waverley's operations too. But the point of tonight's report is not about the governance and financial architecture. It is about individual decision making. And that's what Simon's report and the debate here tonight is about. The important lesson that I take from the report is that all senior leaders need to be vigilant every day, all the time. That is the nature of our role as senior leaders in the local government sector. That's the accountability that we carry and that we choose to carry. Tonight's report is important because we need to be open and clear about what went wrong so that we can move forward with confidence at both councils. So I'll now hand back to you, Deputy Mayor. Simon. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. And now I invite Simon Stephen to present the main findings of the investigators' report. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for inviting me to speak tonight. Pedro has helpfully given already some detail of the background as to why I've ended up speaking to you tonight. But just to give a bit of further context, following the number of other reviews which were carried out as articulated, there were also some internal processes undertaken at Guildford, and the outcome of those was Hemmingsley being instructed by the Joint Senior Staff Committee to carry out this investigation. I should make it very clear that whilst we have taken into account evidence or those findings of those reports, we have not sought to redo them, and we have just taken the material within them to support our process. Our scope, as articulated by Pedro helpfully, was to look at who knew what and when in relation to the issues that led to the matters being investigated by the police in relation to an identified contractual overspend. Our focus was on senior members responsible for housing, in particular members of the Corporate Management Board at Joint Strategic Director level and the Joint Chief Executive. Our approach has been to consider all the evidence we have seen and make findings on the balance of probabilities based on the evidence we have seen. That is important context for when I explain what our findings are. I should also make it clear that whilst the report does cover and does explain that there are matters of governance, matters relating to collaboration, future Guildford in the report, they are outside of our scope, and the report and I make no findings on them. To the extent they are referred to in the report, I will explain in more detail shortly. They are referred to as context given to us by relevant witnesses to explain the situation in which they found themselves. In terms of the methodology followed, we started the process after being instructed by asking for and being given a material amount of relevant information to enable us to understand the context and background and environment in which we were going to be investigating. Following this document review, we carried out initial interviews with what we considered and were asked to, and people were asked to speak to as material witnesses to enable us find the evidential trails. After these initial interviews, we were then provided with a material number of documents coming from some Guildford email accounts, which amounted to over 420,000 documents by themselves. Obviously, that's a material larger number of pages. So we were presented with a material amount of information to review. We did so using an IT tool called Relativity, which we used to do targeted and focused searches on the specific aspect we were given to investigate and the lines of inquiry that we identified. As flagged in the report, there were a material number of different lines of inquiry we could have gone down and a number of different areas. So the documents we were given, there were so many of them and there were so many long, big documents that we had to take a view about where we'd go. Indeed, everywhere we looked, there were different doors we could go down. So we approached this with a matter of proportionality, bearing in mind our scope and what we were being asked to do. Following that document review, we then carried out further targeted interviews with many different kind of people in order to assist with further document reviews and also to draw out the evidence that we had uncovered through the document searches. After we'd completed that process, we then took steps to produce a draft report, which we then sent to the individuals who are named in the report for their comment under the process known as maximalisation. We then took into account all the comments that we received back and sought to put those into the report to ensure that the report was as balanced and reflected individuals' comments and views alongside the evidence we had seen. As has already been explained, we were asked to take the approach of only including names of people at Deputy Chief Officer and above. So that's the methodology of our report, which leads me then to summarise the conclusions of the report. I think I need to make it clear, in fact we do make it clear in the report, that the findings should be taken and read in the context of what we are told are these governance issues. We were given evidence in mitigation, which I'll summarise shortly, in relation to the impact of collaboration, future Guildford, governance and financial issues. So again, we make no findings on those, but we are asked, and we do make sure that individuals take those into account when considering the findings, including potential failings by individuals further down the management chain. But in summary, our findings are that the Guildford senior management and those responsible for housing at the relevant time were unaware that there was a material contractual overspend with a relevant contractor until concerns were formally raised in June 2023, identifying the actual spend. On the evidence that we have seen and on the balance of probabilities, we consider that there were key red flags, however, in existence prior to then, which could and perhaps should have led people at senior management on the corporate management board to identify that there were potential material risks in relation to the engagement of that contractor. And in making these findings, we do acknowledge that a number of these red flags were, of course, in existence before collaboration, before the appointment of the Joint Chief Executive and before the appointment of the Joint Management Team. We have taken the view again on the balance of probabilities that these issues could have been taken collectively at CMB to identify these risks relating to the contractor. And in particular, we find that, again, on the balance of probabilities, that by the end of February 2023, when CMB had sight of a report into a whistleblowing allegation, making allegations of fraud and raising concerns or kind of about this, about the spend with the contractor, that this was an opportunity. These were red flags which could have led to further steps being taken in relation to the contractor, and particularly by the time of the let of a new contract to the contractor in June 2023, contract called the Whole House contract. They are the primary kind of summary of the findings that we make in the report. It is only fair that I do cite that we had a number of material aspects of mitigation asserted to us by witnesses. And again, to reiterate, these are not findings and we do not make findings, but in order to provide a balanced report, it's only fair that we present them. Witnesses asserted to us that their roles were strategic and were too large and complicated, which means they had to rely on their subordinates and were justifiable in doing so, and that any failings were further down the management line. We were also told, or had asserted to us, that senior members were materially hampered by historic and ongoing wider governance issues, including financial governance, monitoring and reporting issues at Guildford. We also had it asserted to us that the collaboration between the councils also needed to be taken into account, as we had it asserted to us that that put a material strain on management. We were also told that Guildford's future Guildford programme had in fact created more issues than it had solved. We were also told and had asserted to us that there was a culture of people seeking to circumvent rules or blaming control functions such as procurement, legal or finance for getting in the way of service delivery. We also had it asserted to us that from August 2022, the senior focus was increasingly centred on Guildford's financial crisis at the time, as it was put to us. We also had it asserted to us that financial systems, including IT systems and process issues, were also a material aspect to the issues that led to the issues being investigated by the police. We also had it asserted to us being the nature of their roles being senior, it was not reasonable to allocate responsibility for the failing of others to senior members of the Corporate Management Board and the Joint Chief Executive. And in the report, we cite elements such as aspects of their joint job descriptions, etc., which leads us to conclude on a balance of probability that ultimate responsibility does rest on senior managers up to the top of that management chain. And that concludes my summary review of the report. And I believe now it's time for questions, maybe.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Before we move on to the questions and answers, may I invite our external solicitor, Mark Greenborough, to comment, please.
I was going to stand up and realise you don't do that here. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and good evening, councillors. I just wanted to say a couple of words, really, by way of introduction to this. Simon's report stands on its merits in the sense that all the information which is relevant to the consideration of the issues in front of you is contained in the report. You'll see there are references in there to appendices. Those are not, so when you made your decision to move into public session or not to move into exempt sessions is the correct polarity of that. You didn't make a decision about those appendices, and I would just caution you. Well, you haven't got them, so you can't make reference to them in detail, but they will contain information which I think your monitoring officer, as the proper officer, would be very cautious about revealing. So, for example, there's the detailed interview notes, which I think might impinge on the criminal investigation, because they give information which would be useful potentially to those looking to provide answers there. So the report stands on its own merits. If you stick to your the factual findings that are made in the report, either in your questions or in your debate, you won't go wrong, as it were. We've discussed the position of the individuals, and of course, you know, it is in the public domain now, and that's all fair, but they're not here to answer for any allegations or criticisms of them. So you know, we can be sure that anything that's in the report has been tested. They've had the opportunity to comment on it, and that's been reflected in a balanced way. So have regard to the duty in the Council's Code of Conduct to have respect and dignity in the comments you make, and you know, remember that there will be a personal impact on them. There's no findings that people did things deliberately. So you know, I think we should be conscious of that in how the debate proceeds. But unless you've got any specific questions for me on, you know, the background to it, or on the debate and so forth, I'm very happy to leave it to Simon to answer the detailed questions on the report.
Thank you, Mr. Greenborough. So now we come to questions and answers. Councillors, do you wish to ask any questions in relation to the investigation? Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, and thank you for the outline of the summary of your findings. You did touch on this point, but I think it would be really helpful for clarity for residents as well. And could you just confirm whether or not the report names the collaboration as a contributing factor to the serious failings and alleged fraud? Could you please perhaps cover that for me? Thank you.
Yes, of course. I can actually make no comment on whether collaboration has any material impact on anything, I'm afraid, because it's completely out of the scope of my investigation. It is in there because witnesses asserted that it was a relevant factor to take into account.
Thank you. That does answer my question. Thank you very much.
Councillor Goodridge.
Two questions, if I may, Madam Deputy Mayor. Could I ask Simon Stevens to confirm that no officers solely employed by Waverley are involved in the problems set out in the report, and that if we didn't have joint officers, Waverley wouldn't have had an interest in this matter at all. And the second question is that I hear rumour that one or more of the officers are considering suing the councils for defamation arising out of either this report or matters leading up to it. As a retired lawyer, I find it difficult to see how that could be, but could you confirm that you do not think that Waverley would be at risk in respect of such actions?
With your permission, Deputy Mayor, just to come in quickly on one of those. So obviously Simon can answer the first question, although I think we can all see that the answer is there are no solely employed Waverley officers included in the report. That isn't the subject of the report. On the second issue around defamation, is it, Michael? I will hand over to Mr. Greenborough.
Yes, I can certainly deal with the first one. No, there are no people solely employed by Waverley involved. I obviously can't comment, however, on whether or not Waverley would have been brought in otherwise. I can only deal with what I have before me.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. In answer to that question on legal risks, obviously my role has been to try to manage risks, identify what they are and to manage them as far as possible. Now, there's no way of controlling people from making complaints, but there is a way of mitigating risks and making sure that the council is in as secure a place as possible. So one of the things that Simon mentioned was a process known as Maxwellisation, and those in the room who will remember the Maxwell brothers and the allegations relating to the Mirror Group pension scheme will recall there was a public report in which they were named, and there was then litigation that followed from that, and the outcome of which is that if you're going to make a report about people which is going to be made public, you should give them an opportunity to comment on it before it is published. We have gone through that process, and Simon has taken careful account of any representations that were made to him, and a number of changes were made, and people were informed of what those changes were, and we haven't had any further representations which haven't been taken into account. So I'm reasonably confident that we're not going to face defamation claims. They're very expensive to launch. We've not had any applications for interim relief to restrain us from publishing the report by way of an injunction. And of course, the nature of litigation would be that every allegation would then be tested in an open court of law. So I think if I was offering advice to people, it would be cautious of that, because that all takes place in public. Information law presents slightly different challenges. People make complaints to the Information Commissioner, and that would be to do with whether it was in public or private session, as I think your leader had generously mentioned earlier. There was a very full debate at Guildford last night, and I think very careful weighing in the balance of the interests of the public interest versus the private interest took place there, and indeed again tonight. So I think you're as sure as we can be that you're not going to face a successful challenge. Whether people raise any spurious challenges, I can't venture to suggest.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Martin and then Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. There is no date on the report. I just wanted to check when the report was complete. I note in the agenda papers on page 12, Appendix 1, it says report of Hemsley Law dated the 20th of January. Was that the final date of it? Was that when it was complete, or just and when were you actually commissioned? When was the start date at which you did the report?
Yes, it was the 20th of January. That's the date of the final report, and we were first instructed in February.
Thank you.
Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. May I ask a specific question in relation to one of the points in the Hemsley report? In section 3.2.8, the point raised is there are concerns raised by KPMG in a draft audit report dated 10th of January 2023, which identified a need for more stringent tracking and monitoring. Do we know what the response to that audit point was?
That wasn't a specific, I didn't investigate that audit finding. It was used as a red, it appeared on the balance of probabilities, not evidence we had to be a red flag, which went into the pot, if you like. My understanding, from what I've been told through by witnesses, and again, I can make no findings on it, is that that audit process did go through and there was a plan, etc. But again, that's outside of the scope and I can't make any other comment on it.
Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mr Stevens. In paragraph 12.3, about the witnesses, it says, during the responses to a draft of this report, witnesses were critical of your methodology. Can you elaborate on that, on what they were critical about?
Yes, critical of the people interviewed and the approach to the document search, in that witnesses thought we could have done a wider document search, which may have found more evidence. The approach we took to these requests was to see where we had specific evidence pointed to us, we could then go and look for it. So if somebody said there is this email or there is this, we would go and look at it. Where we took the view that where people said, if you go and look, there will be more, we considered that would be a disproportionate search to then go, which could be seen as a sort of phishing exercise.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Are you confident that relativity in the time period that it looked at and the inboxes that it looked at didn't miss any other red flag or material concern?
As we document in the report, because of proportionality and because of timing and the scope, we focused on the key issues that are identified here. I cannot comment on whether there may be other things out there outside of our scope or which were not responsive to our searches.
Councillor Gale.
Sorry, just to, I'm not sure if I heard this correctly when Simon gave his initial report. Did you say that there were red flags before the collaboration started? And did you say that the collaboration had put a strain on the management?
So in relation to the red flags, some of the red flags identified did arise before the data collaboration. The point we've made in the report is that they were known by members of CMB or they were available as a collective. So of course, some individuals may not have been involved in them directly, but the report makes clear that it's kind of as a collective. And again, I make no findings on collaboration or the impact. I can only report back on that as to what individuals told me they thought needed to be taken into account.
Councillor Spence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you confirm or advise whether there were any internal audit reviews, particularly of the procurement process during the time of the incidents?
I am not aware of any internal audit relating to the contractor prior to the concerns being raised in June 2023.
Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to ask a question about the recommendations to the council from the Chief Executive. Recommendation 4.1 has been dealt with in public. Recommendation 4.2 is perfectly reasonable. We are noting it and we're commenting on it. I'd just like a little bit of clarification on recommendation 4.3, where we're asked to consider whether any further action could be taken by this council in the public interest. I'm an amateur in this respect, but as Councillor Goodrich has pointed out, this is essentially a Guildford matter. I can't see for myself that there's any further action that this council could sensibly recommend. So I may be wrong in that. So perhaps the Chief Executive could expand on why that is there and what the potential for us to make any further, recommend any further action. I can't see for myself that there is anything for us to recommend, but perhaps the Chief Executive could respond on that point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Of course, Councillor. Thank you for the question. So in terms of 4.3, the actions taken, I alluded to that in my opening, in my introduction. I think I have seen already huge changes in Waverley, positive changes to react to some of the lessons that have come out of Guildford. So we had I witnessed a extremely constructive conversation in executive earlier this week, where we were going through our procurement delegations and making decisions with a lower risk appetite on the basis of some of what was seen, what's come out of this report, and just wanting to make sure that that we have confidence across all of our procedures. I will also note that a lot of the work that's been undertaken has been, for example, through Richard's team tightening up on the financial controls, through Susan's team and the work of the Joint Constitutional Committee that had looked again at some of the rules across both councils. So I'm confident personally that 4.3, the actions that we've taken are sensible and, as I mentioned at the beginning, met.
Excuse me. Madam Chairman, could we ask the Chief Executive just to speak up a little bit or closes the microphone?
I beg your pardon.
Thank you.
I'm cursed with a quiet voice, so I apologise. Is this better? Fine. In summary, 4.3, I think we're taking a number of steps and I have seen Waverley Borough Council procedures and culture and actions improve as a result of the lessons taken wisely from Guildford. 4.4 is in there just because of humility, in the sense that we will never pretend that we know everything. So if somebody has a particularly good idea that is helpful, then of course we're always happy to hear it. However, I will just note that you're absolutely right, Councillor MacLeod. This is about Guildford. So I think it's probably less relevant for this group here, but nevertheless, we thought it was no harm in leaving that. Thank you.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you. It was just a point of procedure following on from that point. If we did have action that we would like the council to take, how would I do that now? Would I put that forward as a motion within my speech? Yeah.
Through you, Deputy Madam Mayor. It would be open to any councillor to propose a motion if they felt there was some action to be taken. Thank you.
Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Not sure who the best person to answer this is, possibly Pedro, but the report obviously identifies there was a risk identified in terms of IT systems not linking up and double entry. Does Waverley use similar systems or are they different?
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. Waverley has not got some of those same IT risks as are flagged there relevant to Guildford. However, there are obviously questions about how we can improve our IT architecture more generally, not just at Waverley, but across both councils, and that's something we'll be picking up. Thank you.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you. Very quick question. Back in 2019, when Councillor John Ward and I took over as leader and deputy leader, we inherited a case of then alleged fraud in the air quality area of Waverley Borough Council, and there was a question at the time as to whether we would pursue a prosecution in terms of malfeasance in public office. I believe the charge was. Could I ask the opinion of either our legal officers or our external counsel as to any possible legal criminal activity prosecution that this council or Guildford and Waverley jointly could pursue, as this is something I've thought about separately, and I just want to see if there's just as an initial opinion. I think it would be rash to propose anything from the floor, considering that 4.3 effectively pushes this to executive scrutiny and standards to consider more thoroughly, but I think it would be a reasonable first pass just to ask our legal officers what prosecution avenues might exist for either or both councils together.
I think everybody's nodding at me. So that's all right. I present a number of these types of reports to councils up and down the country at various times. And you've identified some of the possible lines of investigation or consideration which could be adopted. So variously people look at things like, is there any restitution? In other words, can you recover any of the lost money from any of those people who were responsible for its loss? Is there anything you can do in relation to pensions? Is there anything you can do in relation to misconduct in a public office? All that sort of stuff. There's no recommendation before you of anything of that nature because I don't think anything has any prospect of success. And I don't think there are necessarily the findings that would be necessary to support such action. So, I'm happy to go away and come back with a more detailed response to that. If there are, if you can try and hone it down a little, if there's something you want particularly to consider, but I think that it would be very difficult to justify on a value for money exercise while you were considering those matters.
Then, as this is going to be coming to executive scrutiny and standards, I would hope that those would be appropriate forums to discuss that matter more seriously and to flesh out a scope if any of those bodies wish to do so. Certainly, I will say on behalf of the executive, we will certainly consider that question, but I accept the point that you've made as to how successful that might be and what restitution is available.
Thank you. No more questions? Oh, Councillor Rubini, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's fine. There's a lot in this report about this whistleblower. Can I please ask and be assured, presumably by Pedro, that we have got a robust way of dealing with the whistleblower within the Waverley organisation, that is treated seriously, etc., to make sure that we don't miss any of these red warnings?
Thank you, Councillor Rubini. I'll answer initially, but I think Susan will want to come in as well. The reason I wanted to come in was to say that absolutely we take whistleblowing extremely seriously, and from a cultural perspective, we have been doing a lot of work to make it absolutely clear that anyone who spots an issue anywhere should come forward and should feel safe and appreciated for coming forward. They should not feel threatened or concerned or any of the sort of cultural points that are raised in the report. And we have been making that incredibly clear. So to the point where one does not need to whistleblow, we want to have the sort of organisation where people can just raise concerns and it is normal and appreciated, because nobody is perfect, and unless we're open to hear challenge and to hear criticism and to use that as a way to improve, then we will get nowhere. Susan, do you want to say the more technical answer?
Thank you. I agree with that entirely. I would just point out as well that both councils, Guildford and Waverley, have both reviewed their whistleblowing policies in the last few months. It's been through committee at Waverley who adopted the policy, and it's on our website. And there has been extensive training with officers and raising the profile of whistleblowing as an issue. And I think it's my own personal reflection would be that there's been such a significant change of culture over the last few months that we are seeing people engage with the whistleblowing and are coming forwards and raising concerns, and they are being reassured that they are protected when they do so, and that we view them as being courageous and doing the right thing in bringing forward whistleblowing concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Murray.
I think the best thing I could say is that we won't comment on individual matters. Yeah, we won't comment on individual matters. But just to say that we are, what Susan said and the cultural point, I think is the really important thing to take from this.
As follows.
Sorry, one very quick question as well. It was referred to by Pedro in his introduction and then by me because I repeated it, that there was an assumption that this was being referred to exec standards and ONS. I don't actually see that anywhere in the recommendations, and I'm just asking monitoring officer, do I need to propose an amendment to 4.3 to ensure that that is the case, or is it taken as understood by officers what we mean by 4.3?
I think it's certainly understood by officers, and that is our intention, that we will proactively bring forwards reports to those committees. If members wanted to, they could propose that motion.
I'm content with that response, and we'll wait to see that at exec. Thank you.
Councillor Beaman.
Thank you very much. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it, as you look back? But what concerns me just a little bit on the whole thing is that this could have been going on for some time from what we know. We don't know exactly when it started or whatever. And there seems to be this culture which was not investigated but necessarily by the law firm. And I wondered if that, again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, perhaps if we'd have done perhaps more due diligence before we'd gone into collaboration, would this have been revealed? I don't suppose there's an answer to that, is there?
I'll take that one, Councillor Beaman. Thank you. Oh, sorry, quiet voice. I think the important point here is that what Simon's report brings out is that the leadership at the time weren't aware of the various issues raised. So I think it's difficult and we should avoid getting into speculation, but I think it's important just to note that the conclusion is that the leadership weren't aware at that point until, was it June 2023? Yeah. So I'm not sure what could have happened, but I think much more there is a wondering whether to get into this. You have an item next in your agenda next week that deals specifically with the collaboration, and perhaps that would be a better opportunity to talk about that more generally.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you. Sorry, just finally, whenever someone asks a question, all I hear over here, and maybe others do too, is the leader responding under his breath. And it's a special request actually, that actually the people who should answer the questions, and could the leader refrain from doing that? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No. So before I ask the leader to propose the recommendation in section 4.2 and 4.3 of the report on page 9, may I ask whether anyone has any questions relating directly to the matters of clarity in respect of the motion? Are there any such questions? Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to comment. I think I now understand better what the Chief Executive meant by 4.3. It's more to do with learning lessons, actually, than actually trying. We're not asking this council to propose any further action in relation to this specific matter. We're asking, are there lessons to be learned and what are they? Am I correct in saying that?
I think it's just that I think the only thing for Waverley out of this is to make sure that we learn the lessons. So I think the answer to I consider the main action to be we're learning the lessons, and that's what we're taking forward. And I think the question is there anything else? And that's the 4.4. Thank you.
Thank you. So may I now ask the Leader of the Council, Councillor Paul Follows, to move the adoption of the motion as set out on page 9 of the supplementary agenda pack published on the 21st of January.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Pleased to introduce this. And before I give my introduction, I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'd like to start my introduction to this motion by thanking a few people. First, our joint statutory officers, and particularly to our monitoring officer. It is a great credit to them and a great reassurance to me personally as the leader of this council that our joint officers feel that they can raise matters like this in the way that they have. And I also want to thank the Guildford officers who initially brought these matters to the fore in the first place. They were extremely brave in doing so and should have been heard earlier by those who had a duty to hear them and to act. I want to thank the members also of the Joint Senior Staffing Committee, the Waverley members of the committee in this room, and myself, Councillor Fairclough and Councillor Austin, for your time and engagement with this matter for several months. It was agreed by both councils early on that I would chair the JSSC sessions on this matter, and I also want to thank Mark Greenberg and Simon Stevens for their work and support on this report commissioned by the JSSC. The matter under consideration regarding Guildford is both regrettable and serious. This is a complex subject with a significant legal component, and indeed some elements are of course under investigation by the police. As officers have confirmed, this report is an investigation into the facts of who knew what and when and what they did. I'm extremely concerned that many red flags, including matters relating to whistleblowing, were ignored and not communicated to members at GBC. And indeed, as has been commented on as part of the collaboration, were also therefore not communicated to anybody at Waverley Borough Council at any point. There has also been a parallel report from Solace into the governance and finance gaps at Guildford. And the leadership at Guildford have been phenomenal in the way that they have engaged with that process, created and started to implement their improvement plan. I specifically asked that their plan be included tonight here for your context, because of course they have had that plan in motion for some months and have, I believe, a monthly update to their council. I regularly observe at their council. I did in person last night, but I regularly watch their sessions when they're discussing their improvement plan, because it obviously is of material impact to our collaboration. And I am confident that they are taking that plan very seriously indeed. Waverley, of course, as ourselves, have taken serious note of that plan and taken it as an opportunity to reassure ourselves and scrutinise our own arrangements as an opportunity for continual improvement. And you'll have heard tonight a few examples of where we've done that. We've looked at our own financial rules and procedures and made sure that they are robust as we believe them to be. We have looked at our whistleblowing policy to make sure that it is robust as it can be. We have taken every opportunity to learn from what has happened at Guildford, to strengthen our own collaboration and to strengthen our own council, and to make sure these things are impossible here. Now, there is always a balance of trust, decision and delegation between members and officers that is fundamental and crucial to the functioning of a council. And I'm sure every member here has reflected on that component in how we conduct our duties. There is certainly, I think, and I've been this person myself over the last 2 weeks, in reading this report, there is that moment where you enter that Rumsfeldian dilemma of not knowing what you don't know. And you cannot sit here as a councillor distrusting every single word from an officer's mouth going forward because of a report like this. It means us as elected members need to make sure that the controls are robust, that we have the reassurance and assurance that we need in the work that we do, and that we're able to move forward with our officers to make sure that these controls are effective. Now, Guildford Borough Council and its current leadership have acted, in my opinion, as I believe the public would hope and expect them to. They have openly and honestly, as much as they possibly can, and had public debate and scrutiny on this where possible. They have not sought to hide this or bury this at any point. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm not going to try and use all my time, but for the avoidance of doubt and to reply some inaccurate statements that are already in the public domain and have been floating around, and I'm sure we'll do so again here. Firstly, just to confirm, this matter in financial terms relates exclusively to contracts associated to the housing revenue account in Guildford. There is absolutely no element of Waverley accounts involved in the process, and this is only before you tonight because some of the staff involved were shared staff between our two councils. Secondly, it has been asserted at various places that collaboration has a role in some of this. This matter goes back at least 10 years when you look through the reports, through 3 different parties' control of Guildford, through the Future Guildford Initiative and its consequences, and with, of course, the massive looming background of central government cuts to local government, many of which are the precursors for the actions taken by local authorities across the country. Some of the officers under investigation have stated collaboration as a mitigation. That, of course, is their opinion. The investigation doesn't support or oppose these statements, as it was not its remit, as the author of the report has confirmed now, I think, twice this evening. Now, finally, it has been stated that Waverley residents have paid for this investigation. And of course, we have paid our part because they were joint officers. And I will refer members and public to the Independent Local Partnerships report, which highlights the whole cost and benefit of collaboration to date. Partnerships such as this come with positives and negatives, gains and risks. Now, that report next week on our agenda, and was, of course, released last night, highlights the net positive to our residents. And, of course, this will be debated in full next week. And as you have heard me say before, and I probably sound a little preachy on this, I consider deliberate misrepresentation of the facts to the public by those in elected office to be a very grievous offence indeed. And I will robustly challenge any such comments wherever and whenever they are made. And I will endeavour in my summation at the end of this debate to answer any questions and comments by members. Guildford Borough Council last night, by the way, had an extremely civil debate on this subject, and I am sure members here at Waverley Borough Council will follow that tradition and do so again here. This again is a very serious matter that we need to take soberly and sensibly, and I want to thank all those involved who have made this very sensible report available to you tonight. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. Before that, Councillor Faircraft, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right and speak later?
I will reserve my right, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I come to opposition leaders. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, on behalf of my council group, we recognise that the real tragedy here is that millions of pounds, which should have been spent on improving Guildford's residents' lives and homes, is no longer there. We only hope justice is served via the ongoing criminal investigation. Because this report is shocking. It outlines a catalogue of failures and states that senior managers entrusted to run both of our councils have, on the balance of probabilities, not acted in the way they could or should have been expected to. We see in the report failures by the council of governance, of leadership, of accountability, of process, of culture and of training. But this is a Guildford matter. I am a Waverley councillor and my concern is for Waverley residents because in 2025 we are still dealing with the fallout of the Liberal Democrats' hasty 2021 decision to collaborate our 2 councils. A decision which was made without even a business case. Waverley residents are now needlessly drawn in, experiencing reputational and other damage because of the serious failings of a completely different council's making. Because of the structure implemented by the Lib Dems, we have joint management teams. It's often been chaotic. We've lost nearly all senior joint managers and we've borne half the cost, the associated costs relating to rehire. Guildford's failings and the collaboration have periodically caused us havoc. Extra council meetings, goodness knows how much officer time is spent. Disruption to councillors. We are still tinkering with the constitution. Our experience is that Guildford's financial and governance issues have been a serious distraction for officers and all to Waverley's detriment. Both Conservative council groups believe Waverley has, in effect, been subsidising Guildford for years via staff sharing arrangements. It is our understanding, but I'm waiting for final confirmation from officers, what, if any, measurement of staff sharing is put in place by the leadership of both councils. Numerous interviewees describe their joint roles as being too large, which certainly has been our long-held view. The collaboration is cited by numerous people questioned in the report as a cause of the issues at Guildford. The collaboration as having a negative impact and being a material strain. And now Waverley residents are even having to pay a 50% share of Guildford's legal and other costs in respect of this alleged fraud. And for what? We now see this collaboration has produced, at best, cost benefits which could be described as marginal to date and will be offset by the above costs. So, at least in part. So where do we go from here? I recognise that our CEO and the team are finally making some headway sorting out the fallout from this. The CEO's report suggests we come forward with further suggestions, and these are mine. I don't know if I propose these as a motion now or later. I don't know how this works. Shall I just say them? Waverley residents should not have to pay for any of the costs related to the failings at Guildford. 2, we propose full transparency and accountability of staff sharing arrangements as it henceforth. Staff sharing should be measured and charged accordingly to each council. 3, Waverley's indemnity on any costs from Guildford, please, in respect of any future cost liability resulting from the alleged fraud or from any legal action. Finally, I would just like to say thank goodness for whistleblowers.
We're going to go to the next group leader and then come back to you. So the next group leader is Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Members will be pleased to know I'm not going to be political. I'm not going to mention groups by their political name. I think it's best practice. And in fact, it's good practice to talk about the administration and the principal opposition. In fact, when I read the report to begin with, I had a lot of questions. But when I read it again, I got all the answers. So I think the people involved in producing this report need to be congratulated, and I thank them. With regard to this matter, there are obviously 2 issues. The event's been investigated by the police as being potentially unlawful, and secondly, the governance or lack of governance associated with the people named in this report. This investigation is into events at Guildford Borough Council, but it involved and name officers that were in joint roles across both councils. Their actions or their non-actions refer specifically to Guildford Borough Council matters. So my question is, why are the costs of this investigation, including the advice sought from the various law firms and KCs, not being borne 100% by Guildford Borough Council? I appreciate that the body that commissioned the report and requested the legal advice is Waverley and Guildford Borough Councils. But surely the cost can subsequently be apportioned to Guildford Borough Council. I only ask this question because I am sure that residents will be asking the same question. I'm not sure which member of the panel I am addressing with this question, but hopefully we can have an answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I believe Councillor Austin has proposed an amendment to the original motion that's been moved by Councillor Follows. I just wanted to clarify that. And if so, we should deal with that now. We would need the amendment in writing if possible, or for you to read it out very slowly again so that we can all be very clear. And we would need a seconder as well.
I've got it in writing. I can copy it and paste it over to Shady. Okay. Copy.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, if I could just give some advice. We have a proposed amendment proposed by Councillor Austin and seconded by Councillor Martin. It's in respect of recommendation 4.3 rather than 4.2, and it is proposing that Waverley residents should not have to pay for any of the costs related to the failings at Guildford, proposing full transparency and accountability of staff sharing arrangement henceforth. Staff sharing should be measured and changed accordingly to each council, and a proposal that Waverley's indemnity on costs from Guildford in respect of any future cost liability resulting from the alleged fraud, including any legal action. If I could just give a little bit of legal advice, I don't feel that that is an amendment that can be accepted and dealt with this evening because of the legal implications that are being proposed. So whether or not Waverley Borough Council should be contributing to the costs of this investigation is a matter contained within the inter-authority agreement between the two councils that governs the arrangements for the sharing of staff. and sets out the obligations upon both councils in terms of costs relating to both of those staff. Also, in respect of an indemnity, that's something that officers would want to go away and come back with a proper full report with some proper legal advice in it for you. So I don't feel that that is a proposed recommendation that can be dealt with tonight. I would suggest perhaps that a way of disposing with it would be either to defer it to another meeting or for Councillor Austin to raise those issues at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee when they look at this, or alternatively for there to be a more generalised motion that officers go away and look at whether there is any flexibility in terms of the legal cost sharing arrangement, and then come back to members with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for your advice. I wanted to make clear in my 4 minutes what my ideas are. I don't necessarily have for them to be debated right at this moment. I think they are important things that our council should be discussing. And so I'm happy to take that away, give it some consideration, and then let's come back and discuss it properly in a forum. Thank you. So I withdraw the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Merely just one very quick comment. Councillor Austin, like myself, is also a member of the Joint Governance Committee, whose remit is the inter-authority agreement, where such questions would be very pertinent. The other place that it could be raised, and I believe in terms of the procedure regarding collaboration matters, the JGC would need to review such a thing first anyway, and it would probably therefore be the most appropriate venue to discuss that in the first instance.
Thank you. So now that has been withdrawn and we go back to the debate on the motion. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. I don't know if we have the opportunity to comment on what Councillor Austin said, because she made a phrase of tinkering with the Constitution. And I think, if I'm allowed to say so, Madam Mayor, I think it shows that she doesn't really understand what's going on, actually, in terms of the Constitutional Review Group and so on. I'm sure she didn't really mean to, if she knew what was happening, she wouldn't have said something which seems a bit like an insult to Susan Sale and the team of officers who've been doing a tremendous amount of work into this. And also the councillors have had many late night meetings, in fact, on it. And we've got two very distinguished Conservative councillors in the group. One, our one being Councillor Goodrich, who's made an invaluable contribution due to his tremendous length of experience and his legal knowledge. And there's another OBE, as it happens, from the Guildford side. So I have to say to Councillor Austin, it was a very ill-advised remark to make, actually, because it was an insult to the very good work being done by all these people. I hope it's appropriate to say that, Madam Mayor.
Well, you have. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Merriweather.
I'd actually like to start by agreeing with Councillor Austin. Whistleblowers are to be encouraged and welcomed. And in this case, I'm very glad that the whistleblower felt in an environment after the collaboration had started that their claims would be taken seriously. Because, as the report makes very clear, the red flags started to go out way before the collaboration was even conceived of. And I'd also like to make the point that the report makes absolutely no judgment at all about the causation connection between the collaboration and the failings there. It doesn't even make a conclusion about the correlation of the failings in the collaboration. The claims that I've heard referred to were made by the individuals involved as part of their defense. And you know, one could look at that as to why they chose to make those claims in the first place. I'd like to just pick up on a couple of other things, because Councillor Austin has seemed to lack a certain amount of homework when it comes to some of the things that have happened tonight. This is not a Liberal Democrat council. It has not been a Liberal Democrat council since 2019. We have Farnham residents on the executive. We have Labour, we have Greens, we've had independents. It is a cross-party administration, and I think it does a great disservice to our colleagues who aren't Liberal Democrats to be excluded from the credit that is due to them for running this council so well and for making sure the collaboration is on target to deliver everything that was promised. I'd also like to just suggest next time this kind of amendment or the amendment that we've just considered comes up for discussion, it's useful to have some evidence when claims are being made, when things are being proposed. And it's also quite useful sometimes to have an impact assessment of what is being suggested. We provide evidence and we provide impact assessments for everything that we do. And it is very difficult for this council to consider any other alternative when one is even actually being proposed without equivalent evidence and without equivalent impact assessments. As far as the costs and the benefits of the collaboration are concerned, it's very clear from this evening, and it will be clearer even still next week, that the one-off costs of the collaboration have paid for themselves 1.5 times over. And now that the one-off costs are being sunk, the continuing recurring benefits of the collaboration, just on a financial sense, will accrue to this council just as much as anywhere else. And the non-financial benefits in terms of the quality of the service, the value for money, the continuous improvement that we strive for will only accelerate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I have to say I didn't take it as an insult to the Joint Constitutions Committee as to from the remarks from Councillor Austin. I mean, we have been busy, that's true. And one of the things that we had to do in any event was the new rules for procurement for two reasons. Firstly, that clearly wasn't working in Guildford at all. And secondly, the law had changed. So we had to, in fact, change it for this council as well because of the law change, which gives me some comfort that after the horse is bolted, at least in Guildford, we do have a stronger situation than existed before. I do think there's a case for us to discuss at some stage about getting back or not paying for the costs that have incurred. When we entered into the heads of agreement initially for the collaboration, it was very clear that the default position would be that cost of services would be shared and costs would be shared, but it was the default position which did make it clear that there could be a position whereby it would not be fair and reasonable and just for councils to share a certain expense. And it does seem to me that when it's not just the 109,000 for the report. I suspect there are an awful lot of legal fees still around that haven't been billed yet. And so I think it would be very helpful for this council councillors to be told as soon as it is known what the total cost of this fraud investigation, reports to do with it, and the whole shooting match, how much that has cost in total, which we are being asked to pay half of. And I can see that residents of Waverley would feel rightly miffed at the thought of having to pay half of it in the circumstances where no solely employed Waverley officers were involved. And the only reason why we've been dragged in is because of joint officers being involved in Guildford, which happen to be the officers for us as well. So I think that is something which I'd hope we look at in the future. Madam Mayor, I hope you'll excuse me. I've got to go and chair another meeting at 7. So I'm going to be departing shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I have to say I'm somewhat annoyed that we are reviewing a subject here that has no benefit to the people of Waverley, save to ensure that the processes in Waverley are robust and will not be subject to the same difficulties. Like Councillor Clark and Councillor Goodrich and Councillor Austin, I'm annoyed also that 50% of the £109,000 cost of this report by Hemsley Law is to be borne by the residents of Waverley. That's more than 1/6 of the total collaboration savings identified by the recently released local partnerships report. And yes, this is just on this one report. And as Councillor Goodrich said, how many more costs are there going to be? I might say, Madam Deputy Mayor, that in a meeting in February 2024, when I was the leader of the opposition, I did oppose the allocation of costs that were proposed in this way, because I don't think, whilst the default position is that we share 50-50, there have to be exceptions, and surely this is an exception. And it's very difficult to stand in front of a Waverley Council taxpayer and say that they are bearing these costs. And I reject the argument from the council leader regarding swings and roundabouts, I have to say. I'm also annoyed that many of our senior officers from Waverley, as was, were drawn into this unfortunate position. I can only observe that they would not have been so implicated had we not had gone into this collaboration or something like a merger with Guildford. I'm concerned that a former chief executive officer said, and I quote, "The collaboration was a fundamental strain on senior managers being able to access information and create a healthy and functioning governance environment." I'm concerned that a former joint head of housing said that his role was unmanageable and that he was in a role he could not fulfill and that he did not have effective support from his line management. I'm concerned that a former joint head of finance said that the lack of financial controls and an absence of robust financial reporting would always heighten the risk of not detecting or deterring fraud. And he also said that overspending at Guildford was common. And I'm also annoyed, Madam Deputy Mayor, that we're not here today reviewing the budget and the medium-term financial plan. The budget timetable has been put back. It seems to me that the officer team, the administration, and now members are having to spend too much time on fraud in Guildford and not enough time on the budget in Waverley. I am, of course, deeply concerned and unhappy for the Guildford Borough and its residents that fraud has occurred and that officers felt under strain and in roles that they couldn't fulfill and that they were apparently working with a deeply flawed financial system. All that, of course, must change. And I am genuinely pleased to see that progress is being made with the new senior team and with the Guildford Improvement Plan. I absolutely recognise that. But none of this takes away my annoyance that we here in Waverley are having to bear the costs of legal reports, investigations, extra meetings, and diverted officer and member time and energy into something that really has nothing to do with Waverley. And whose fault is this? Well, yes, it is the fault of this cross-party administration that has taken us into this collaborative mess. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman.
Whether we like it or not, we're on the cusp of local reorganisation, and I believe that the lessons to be learned from this particular exercise will be very valuable in whatever may be foisted upon us, or whichever way we go forward. In fact, if you fast-track it, it'll be very useful in background knowledge to have. So I think let's look on the, let's say, the silver lining of this particular cloud.
Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. In order to succeed, organisations need strong and clear processes. There needs to be clarity as to who does what within those processes, and it's extremely important it identifies who is ultimately responsible for ensuring those processes happen. The report shows what happens when you do not have that in place. Although the Audit and Risk Committee isn't considered very glamorous or exciting, it plays a vital role in looking at risk and ensuring there are processes in place to mitigate those risks. I'm grateful to my colleague, Councillor Spence, who chairs the Audit and Risk Committee, who has been strong in ensuring that Waverley Borough Council does assess risk comprehensively. So I thank him and the members of the committee for doing that. Now, returning to the report, a number of issues were identified in the report, but I think that the one that really disappointed me was that individuals named in the report seemed to want to blame others rather than take any responsibility for failing to resolve the issues that were evident at the time. That's not just a governance issue, that's a culture issue. So I'm pleased to see that action has been taken at Guildford Borough Council to rectify this in accordance with the Solis report. The individuals identified in the report are the ones that are responsible for failing to fulfil their responsibilities under their job role. But unfortunately, like a broken record, the Conservatives want to blame the collaboration between Waverley and Guildford. This is a collaboration that an independent report has confirmed has already saved over £600,000, and those savings will continue to grow. A sum that the leader of the opposition has quoted in the Guildford Dragon as saying was poor, and tonight she called it marginal. Well, that might not be a lot of money to her, but £600,000 is a lot of money to hard-working Waverley residents. £600,000 is also more than the Conservatives would have saved, as they have persistently voted against the collaboration and against making these savings. In the same Guildford Dragon article, the leader of the opposition is quoted as saying that the cost savings could have been sourced in-house. Well, that gets to the heart of what the Conservatives always do when they get into power. They cut costs by cutting jobs, cutting services that people desperately need. Well, the whole country knows that doesn't work, and Liberal Democrats will always put people first rather than try to oppose something that saves taxpayer money in an attempt to score political points. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murray, yes, Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As a newcomer in 2023, I, like many of my cohort, were unaware of the historical context surrounding the collaboration between Waverley and Guildford, and it was agreed, obviously, by the previous administration. I sought insights from my colleagues and attentively listened to the opposition's frequent criticisms, trusting in the prevailing belief that this partnership would ultimately prove beneficial and represent the future of local governance, and I supported the initiative. During this period, also, I observed the turnover of senior staff, as we can see in the reports, and the challenges what Guildford were happening. However, we were advised against inquiring too much, as matters were under police investigation at the time. A recent report from the local partnerships indicates that the collaboration is progressing well and having already achieved 603,000 in staff savings, with expectations of further savings, as Michael has alluded to. But conversely, the Helmsley report reveals that certain senior officers, including the senior officers named and officers A and B, received undisclosed financial settlements. And it remains unclear whether these payouts, which are private and secret, whether they're accounted within this 603,000, I don't know. Talking about staff being under pressure, you're right that that it was only Tom Horwood who mentioned in the report that the collaboration imposed significant strains on senior management, and we did notice that when we first came to this council in 2023, that there was a lot of people were under pressure, and that's what's happened. And certainly since the last 2 years, I've noticed, and it's obviously been a big change. But the reality is that must have been evident to all councillors during that period before we became councillors and in the previous administration. But beyond the reputational impact, particularly on Guildford, the human cost to our colleagues across both council has been substantial. I urge all members of this chamber to reflect on whether this collaboration was genuinely beneficial or could have been a political misstep. As we consider the formation of unitary authorities and other structural changes, It is imperative that we proceed with comprehensive planning and allocate appropriate resources to support the teams involved. We must avoid jeopardizing public funds and the careers and well-being of our colleagues without a well-defined strategy and plan in place before we go down this road further. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was very glad to see the improvement plan included in our papers for Guildford, and it's great to see that they've achieved so much in such a short amount of time, which shows their commitment to making fundamental changes within the council there. I would urge councillors here to not present some of their opinions as fact or to prejudice any future action that might or might not be taken in this matter. And can I urge councillors to make sure that they say that it is alleged fraud and that we don't use the word fraud. We have to be careful with our language, whether we use that in this chamber or outside this chamber as well. If we are using opinion, one could equally say that the collaboration has shone a light on this matter and provided a robust and transparent framework in which officers felt that they could come forward to whistleblow, and they felt that there was a robust process in place that this would be investigated and their concerns would be taken seriously. Councillor Beeman has already mentioned that we, can learn from this matter, and we have learned. Pedro has already outlined some of the ways we have already strengthened our own robust procedures. And and I do get a little bit exasperated sometimes, as if this collaboration is in isolation. And I've said it before in this chamber, collaborations are really quite common across the country. This approach has been adopted by a lot of local authorities to save costs, to improve efficiency and share resources while maintaining separate political identities. It isn't an unusual thing, and it is tried and tested. It's particularly prevalent amongst councils of our size, and also, against the pressures and challenges that we face across the country in government funding. So I think that we need to bear that in mind as well when we're talking about that. We've got a report coming to council where we can discuss, councillors can discuss the pros and cons in more depth. But I think that report, which has already been published online, has already, pointed out the potential for yet more savings, and also points out that there's been no negative impact on the delivery of services across the councils. And as has been mentioned about, the potential for the unitary authorities, the pressure of collaboration of 11 district and boroughs and one county council coming together will be considerable, but it will be the job of officers to bring that forward. And I think in the same way that this collaboration may have put some additional pressure, but that pressure is part of the job of officers to bring that together. And they would have taken on those roles in the full understanding of what was going forward. And I would also say to Councillor Martin, this is an extraordinary meeting. It's an extra meeting. It's not taking away from the budget. You'll have your chance to discuss that in fine fettle, I'm sure, very soon. This is an extra meeting to just discuss this one particular point. So I think it's important that we do discuss it here and that we learn and make changes to our own systems. But let's not pretend that this is any particular opinion on the collaboration, which is being portrayed slightly here and also outside this council. Thank you.
Thank you. One teeny polite reminder, we're debating the motion, not the collaboration. Councillor Ken Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I wasn't expecting to speak this evening, so I haven't written any extended speech for everyone to listen to, but 3 points have come up to me during the debate this evening. And the first is that there seems to be a lot of effort put in by some councillors to suggest that these problems have all come about because of the collaboration. Nothing could be further from the truth. Collaboration also, as far as some councillors are concerned, is a bad idea. I would like to embarrass the chief executive and ask why on earth did he apply for the job? And maybe also the chief financial officer, because I believe they have all joined since the collaboration was in place. So they must think that some good things have come from it. The problems at Guildford and Waverley have not benefited at all. That is the point that some have made. But I believe the chief executive said that actually Waverley have benefited from these investigations because we have changed some of the processes and procedures that are now in place within Waverley. So it is less likely to happen here. So there, but for the grace of God, I might say. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers. Councillor Spence first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indeed, when I read this report, I felt it was very sobering in the way it highlighted this, frankly, a string of governance and control failures. Really some huge cultural failures, and I felt it was both sad and unedifying to read the attempts of so many of the witnesses to deny responsibility and shift blame to others. Responsibility and taking ownership of actions is something that I think we should all hold dear. I note that the governance issues that this report raised are really dealt with in the SOLAS report, and there were a number of them. In fact, Councillor Austin mentioned a few of them, like the procurement processes. And I was reassured by the chief executive's comments earlier that as far as Waverley is concerned, these areas have been reviewed and we are making changes where we see things can be improved. And as far as the Risk and Audit Committee is concerned, you can be assured that we will continue to seek assurances that the controls are at their very best. Now, we've also heard a lot about collaboration, as if that is the sole cause and the real driver behind this. I would draw members' attention to what seemed like a passing reference, but I think is one that's quite important. And that's on the top of page 10 of the report, item 7.1. Where the report says, we understand that Guildford had historically underinvested in housing stock and that this had led to a number of serious compliance issues. It seems to me that such underinvestment is somehow the root cause of what happened here, because of the underinvestment, they were then forced to make substantial budget increases, allowing large contracts to come through. And I think it's very important that when we avoid such hard decisions or prevaricate and delay taking them, we are building up problems for the future. And I take a lot of comfort from the way that this council has continually invested in its housing stock. And I commend the administration for so doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spence. So now, Councillor Fairclough, you'd like to use your right to speak.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and you will be delighted to hear that I will not be using the C word this evening. Councillor Martin is quite correct. The primary concern of this chamber should be Waverley Borough Council. Undoubtedly, the report into past failings by Guildford Borough Council makes for very uncomfortable reading and raises serious questions about their systems and procedures. It also raised a serious question for this council. Were Waverley's systems and procedures sufficiently robust? I can assure members that this was one of the first questions asked in the very first session of the JSSC to discuss this matter. Thankfully, they were sufficiently robust. And here you will have noted that I have used the past tense. Some may question why Waverley is contributing 50% of the cost of a report into the past failings of another council. Indeed, as Councillor Martin will probably recall, I questioned this myself at that very first meeting. The answer, of course, is that we, Waverley, can also learn from these findings, and we will and we have. Yes, Waverley's systems and procedures thankfully were sufficiently robust. However, as with everything, there is always room for improvement. A key non-financial benefit of any partnership is shared knowledge. And this report is an absolute example of that. One should never rest on one's laurels. This report into another council's failings will ensure that Waverley does not. And it will help ensure that Waverley remains an ever more resilient and well-run council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Follows, would you like to sum up?
Yes,
please?
thank you very much. I know our current officers have very big and very serious jobs, and there is, I think, for most people in positions of leadership and responsibility, a level of semi-permanent anxiety and worry about missing something or dropping the ball and having to face the consequences of it. Certainly I feel that in this position. I know our officers do too. Now, most of this report, though, is not about that. It's about not acting on serious red flags and even whistleblowing. Now, I hope our present senior officers know, and if they don't know, I'm saying it again right now, that my executive and I will always seriously consider issues about capacity that you bring to us, as long as you bring it to us. And I expect you to bring red flags and particularly whistleblowing to us. And I know you know that, and I know you would. I hope some of the issues raised tonight will be raised in the proper place, the Joint Governance Committee, where collaboration policy is discussed. It is also disappointing from the opposition that something so serious would be amended or proposed to be amended in such a way from the floor, almost at random without any consideration to impact. You'll notice on the agenda for next week's council, there is in fact amendment to the budget rules to stop such ridiculous amendments being posed without a proper impact assessment to the council. I look forward to hearing it in the proper place. Councillor MacLeod did say it, I'm going to say it again. The Leader of the Opposition has previously disparaged, and did so again, the work of the Joint Constitutions Review Group. Keep in mind that part of the work of that group has been to take the learning of the circumstances in Guildford and propose changes and make the processes of both councils more robust. The decision-making protocols, officer delegation scheme and whistleblowing policy, to name but three very recent and relevant examples. And I've been very pleased to work alongside that group. Councillor Spence and Councillor Higgins, I'm also extremely grateful to you in the work of your committee and the work that they do in keeping Waverley robust in its financial and risk management. In further reference to Councillor Austin's comments, it is interesting that someone describes the collaboration between Waverley and Guildford as rushed and hasty, when that person has recently supported with other Conservatives across the county in wanting a more forcibly and undemocratic merger of all 11 boroughs and districts and to cancel county elections to boot. Somewhat ironically, the local partnerships report, of course, where it has critique, essentially says that we could have moved faster than we have. Costs are shared because benefits are shared too. The benefits are outweighing the costs, as is clear from the independent report on the such. To borrow Councillor Goodrich's words, I don't think residents are miffed because of the collaboration, because we've had to make no cuts to services as a result of it. Because of collaboration, for example, we are not just maintaining the community and charity support through the Thriving Communities Fund, but actually proposing to expand it by 10% in our draft budget, none of which would be possible without the collaboration and the work it does. And so I seriously urge those of you who would seek to cherry pick the costs that you don't want to incur, that by seeking to ignore the costs that we incur, you also potentially ignore all the benefits too, which an independent report says is outweighing those. Now, I have a duty, Councillor Murray and others, not to throw rocks and to, ignore the costs of things, but I also have a duty to the most vulnerable in our community. And I think the collaboration, as long as it is delivering the savings and other non-financial benefits to both councils, that is allowing me to maintain services in this borough for the people who desperately need them, we have a duty to do it. And now, of course, local government reorganisation is clearly taking the same tack. And most of it now we're out of our hands. we are in Waverley and Guildford to a degree prisoners of geography within Surrey, in that every possible unitary combination within this county will involve Guildford and Waverley. And as such, all past work and future work in the collaboration has in fact been, as many of us, including me in this chamber, said at the time, an investment not just in the present borough of Guildford and Waverley, but also in our future as a unitary. So I am looking forward to working with Guildford going forward. I'm looking forward to seeing their improvement plan develop and its success. But tonight is about the report that is in front of you. And I want to again thank those who have drafted it, those who have put the time in doing the robust investigation and the detail that goes behind it, to the officers that raise these issues through whistleblowing in Guildford, and to those statutory officers who, once again, I thank for having the courage and the robust attitude to their professional work to bring these things forward, so that those of us that care about such things can openly, transparently and honestly debate them in public such as this. Thank you. I commend the motion and its recommendations to you, members.
Thank you. So we move to the vote. And despite what I said earlier about consuls, I've been advised we'll do it with show of hands. So those in favour of the motion, please raise your hands. Is it? Thank you. That is unanimous. So no need to call out for, against and abstentions. Before we, yes, that is carried. That is carried. Thank you. Thank you. Before we close the meeting, because there's no other business, I do have a little reflection, which I could have shared at the beginning, but I share it at the end because I've been thinking while I've been listening. And I would like to say that the Mayor of Waverley was also unable to be here in this chamber this morning to present the certificates for long service awards to our officers. There were, I think, 6 or 7 officers who've worked here for 20 years, 30 years, and some 40 years, a combined 220 years of service to this community. I thanked them on his behalf, on all of your behalves, because they all are brilliant and they are doing very difficult work dealing with members of the public. We know what that's like, but that is their job. They do it for us. They do it for Waverley. They are brilliant. So that is my reflection. And with that, I close the meeting.